Good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome you all to the February 9th meeting of the Hanson Finance Committee. I will entertain a motion to open.
Second.
The motion was made by Mrs. Werdeman, seconded by Mrs. Wright. We'll do a roll call vote. Mr. Dugan?
Aye.
Mr. McCormick?
Aye.
Ms. Wright?
Aye.
Mrs. Werdeman?
Aye.
Sullivan, aye. We are open for business. Thank you, everyone. It's good to see everyone on this snowy evening. I dropped off budget books, so everyone should have their budget book, but we're going to kick it right off with the South Shore VOTEC Superintendent, Mr. Tom Hickey. He has been gracious enough to join us tonight to give us a once-through of his budget, where we're going, what the plans are for the upcoming school year and beyond, and hopefully answer any of our questions and get it all done in one shot here. So I will say, Superintendent Hickey, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Kevin, members of the committee. I'm also joined tonight by Hanson's representative to our regional school committee, Chris Amico, who's on the call as well. I appreciate you taking the time to fit me in. I know it's the busy season, certainly. I was able to supply a couple of documents in advance, and I would not belabor going back through them in great detail, but I certainly will give you an overview and talk about some priority items. But let me let me just jump into some numbers here. I think that overall the budget that I am proposing to our school committee, which I initially presented back in December, has an overall budget increase of 1.89%. Our operating expenses are very lean going into this budget year for a lot of obvious reasons. I think the biggest theme that comes out of this, which I'll touch on later, is we were devoting increased dollars to a large capital project, which is to have us replace windows on part of the school. And we spent a lot of time looking at long-range capital forecasting. And because we build our capital into our single assessment number that we bring to our towns, we've got to make sure that we have a handle on it. So part of what I made mention of in our budget presentation is that there's about $760,000 baked into the budget that would involve a big window project. The budget doesn't include any debt. We had the last vestiges of a roof project from 2010 roll off in this fiscal year. So going into fiscal 22, we won't have any debt within the assessment numbers. There are some minor personnel adjustments. I've got a couple of staff members who are on grants, and I'm trying to incrementally move them onto the budget and increase some support for our school nurse and for our allied health program. In general, how the numbers impact Hanson, we're projecting Hanson's preliminary assessment to be $1,228,077, which is an increase of $92,657. Hanson's enrollment is up 5%, or four students, from 80 to 84 students going into fiscal 22. When I look at the numbers for each of our 8 towns, I'm always interested in trying to do a one-year look back to see if there's a particular driver. When I talk to communities that have a very large share of the student population, when we have large capital lines, oftentimes that can be pointed to as the capital went up. That could be a trigger for it. If I was trying to answer that question for Hanson this year, I would look at the minimum local contribution, which is the number that we wait for, all school districts wait for the governor's budget to come out. So when that came out on January 27th, we were able to take that figure, and the projection is that the overall increase in the minimum local contribution, the number from the state, was about $117,000 over last year. So I think a combination of our operating costs being a little bit lower and the shift of dollars to the minimum local contribution, as well as an increase in enrollment, all of those factors are built in. So I'm happy that the budget continues to move us forward as a school. I think all of our core services are certainly going to be protected, and I think we're doing a great job. Our forecasting model involves a lot of long-range planning, but we also embrace zero-based budgeting, where we ask our cost center supervisors and department heads to, start with the blank slate and justify where their expenses are. And that has proven to be very helpful for me to be able to bring budgets to our school committee that I think are affordable and move the school forward, because we're not just adding a little bit onto last year's allocation. I think our staff recognize that if everyone is willing to work together and plan long range, I know that I can allocate dollars from one year to the next. If someone willingly says, I don't need as much as I did last year, that's wonderful, because they know that the greater good is that Department X is getting it next year for that big piece of equipment or some additional supplies. This year, our social studies department we're on a 6-year cycle to replace textbooks for 9th and 10th graders. So the social studies department budget will be much larger this 1 year for that one reason, and then that will roll off, and then we'll reevaluate it from year to year. So I'm very pleased with how that part of the process is working. I'd be happy to entertain questions. I can rattle off on a few more numbers if you'd like, but I'll stop here, Mr. Chairman, and see if someone might want me to go a little deeper on anything I may have just said.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hickey. Any members of the committee have any direct questions? I did pass out both the it was the regional vocational school district FY22 budget presentation, and then the spiral book handout. So we do have both of those.
Excellent. That's great. So those documents help to give the overview from me and then unpack the numbers. How do we arrive at assessment numbers? What goes into it? That when we bring a number to a town, it includes the minimum local contribution, operating costs above the minimum, transportation, debt, and capital. And so that we try to provide as much detail as possible, showing how those numbers are arrived at. Mr. Chairman, if there aren't any immediate questions, I'd be happy to circle back to it. And in the interest of time, I did also want to talk about something else that the committee is working on in this budget cycle that would culminate in Springtown meetings, which is looking to put together a debt authorization article. And this may warrant additional attention at a separate meeting. I'm more than happy to do so. Basically, the other document that's important to us is a facilities master plan that we worked with an engineering firm to put together in 2018. Essentially, our story is that we're a well-maintained school, the second oldest regional vocational school in the state. Very proud of what we've been able to do with our building. It consists of a 1962 original building that's about 2/3 of the footprint, and a 1992 addition. Because of issues of student demand for the school and an aging part of the building, we have faithfully continued to apply to MSBA to get some positive attention, looking for a modest addition and renovation. We've been doing this since 2015, but in that time, we've also taken responsibility for saying we can't afford to let the school go into disrepair or wait. So we've been working on capital items. This plan of ours has helped to focus and forecast even further where the costs are. I mentioned earlier that we're going to do hopefully a window replacement project, and that's probably the last big capital project that we can afford to do in a single budget year. It would be highly irregular to say that we could replace a roof and not spread those costs out over a few years. And a roof is an example of a project that we would need to borrow money for. And so our strategy right now is to make a presentation to our towns where what we're saying is we forecast that we need these infrastructure improvements and that we need some additional space. We don't want to try to fit it. We can't reasonably fit it in a given annual budget. So we're going to be asking our towns to authorize our ability to borrow. And that will give us the flexibility to address projects over several years. It's my personal hope, and it's no guarantee, that at some point during the process of us tackling these larger projects, that we would eventually get MSBA to invite us into their core program. And then we could reevaluate what projects we would still do on our own and what projects we would absolutely wait on until MSBA comes forward. We've been very methodical also about setting aside funds for, as many of you probably know, the process that's involved, and you need funds for feasibility studies. And we've established, several years ago, we established a stabilization fund. We already have those funds available. So I am looking forward to the day where we can, as a district, be able to say, we're ready to enter the core program. We already have the funds. We do not need to go and ask for additional funds from our communities. So the debt authorization piece is essentially asking for about $18.9 million. That you can't get around a big number like that. So I usually want to wait a second or two and to qualify it by saying we don't have any intention of borrowing that money up front all at once. We don't have a need for it immediately, but we do see several projects coming down the road. And this would give us the flexibility to be able to undertake those projects, perhaps in smaller bundles over the next several years. We have to go to all 8 of our towns each time that there's a debt authorization, and we're hoping that this would allow us the flexibility to do so. And each town will take the matter up at their respective town meetings. So if I were forecasting what we would do with this, if we were to go to our spring town meetings and all 8 of our towns said, yes, we support that, I would envision being back in front of you a year from now, probably with a slate of assessments, a similar document that Kevin sent out. And on the debt service line, there'd probably be a figure for each of our communities. And it would probably be for replacing a 30-year-old roof on our 1992 edition. And my hope would be that we would have a combination of budgeted money, stabilization, and some borrowed money to do that. But that's the first example. And I can certainly give other examples and provide, if you had a chance to look at the facilities plan, there are issues with fires, not issues, but we don't have fire suppression in our 1962 building. And we have the original ventilation in a good part of the building as well. So we're still moving ahead. We're doing a fantastic job instructing students. We just really want to push this building deeper into the 21st century. We don't need a new building. We don't need a new building even if MSBA comes a knocking, but we are certainly going to try to take matters into our own hands. So what does it mean for Hanson? Hanson's share of the debt is calculated by taking a 3-year look back of the 3 fiscal years that precede debt authorization. So my calculation, if you wanted to keep a percentage or a number in your head, is that if at any point from what I said, if some of this comes true, Hanson's share of whatever we're trying to get done that involves debt would be about 13.65%. And again, that depends on the length of the note, but when we bring you a number, that debt would be built in. So for instance, way back in 2010, we did this when we replaced a roof on our 1962 building. It was a $3 million estimated project. We went to all 8 of our towns. We asked for authorization to borrow. It was an MSBA project, so you had to go and ask the towns for the full amount. And then when the final figures came in, we ended up borrowing a little over $1 million. We then spread that out over 10 years. And so for the last 10 fiscal years, there's been a sliver of every town's assessment that included debt. That was the debt I just mentioned earlier that was rolling off. And that's how we would proceed going forward. If we borrow money, we carve it up based on the regional agreement, the proportion of the 3-year look back, and then it gets baked into the numbers that we bring to our towns. So we fully recognize that if we're going to borrow money and it's going to be part of a debt share, we've got to be sensitive to the fact that at the end of the day, it's the bottom line number that's going to matter. If it's because 0% of the budget is due to debt, okay. If it's 10%, whatever it is, towns are going to have to look at that bottom line number and make it fit as you're all charged to do. So that's a little bit on the debt authorization. This is something, like, as I said, be happy to talk about at another point. But it certainly is important for us as a district to be able to make plans for these larger projects and make it a little more affordable so that we can bring it to our communities and still maintain an operating budget that serves the needs of kids. Could I answer any questions on that part, or maybe circle back to the budget?
Sure, thank you. Does anyone from the committee we'll start off with the budget, the general budget. Anyone have any questions related to the budget?
I'm good.
Nope.
Well, looks like you might get off easy there, Tom. No, it's a well presented budget as usual.
Yeah.
It's laid out in the proper way to explain it to everyone looking at it. So if there's no questions on the budget, any overall questions regarding the superintendent's capital plan or borrowing over the next few years?
Yes, I do.
Go ahead, Mike.
Hi, Tom.
Mike, how you doing?
Not too bad for a snowy night.
That's all right.
Wanted to kind of get a feel for talking about a potential $18 million facility. And I'm just kind of thinking of the structure. I'm thinking about how that gets presented to the town, because kind of what I'm hearing is multiple projects spaced out over a handful of years would aggregate to that number, but to provide the authorization for the debt on day one, I'm kind of thinking it's almost like I know it's a bad analogy, but I'm going to say it anyway. It's almost like, here's the credit card for that. And as far as the town is concerned, I would think that we would have to assume that our ability to meet that debt obligation would be under the assumption that it would be fully advanced. Because at some point in time, if we're going to say it's 18 million on day one, then we're on the hook for 18 million. And I guess kind of as that were to go forward, I guess more detail on that projected basis in terms of this is what we're planning in year 1, year 2, year 3. Would it be a 20-year IRB with a 4-year draw period? Something that would give a little bit more detail as to how you think you would go about doing these over the course of, as you said, it's not all one big project. It would be multiple improvements. So I guess, I see on day one trying to theoretically have to find room in the budget to potentially service our share of 18 million. Whereas that probably isn't logical, even to your point. You wouldn't borrow it all out of the gate because you couldn't afford it. I think that's going to be the stumbling block to understanding this better for me, and I think as it's being presented to the town.
I agree with your initial assessment. I think it's a fair question and one that we should be able to unpack. At this point, I could unpack in providing great detail the recommendations that went into that number, how we took the existing recommendations, we took out the ones that we've already accomplished, we added in a 4% inflation factor through fiscal 23, we added in some OPM and designer costs. Not everything in the plan would require an OPM and a designer. And then we added in 10,000 square feet at about $325 a square foot. Again, I don't mean to rattle all this off, but just to give you a sense of where of that 18.9 million, about I'm gonna say about 15, actually about 16 million before we did some offsets was for infrastructure, and about 4 million was for 10,000 square feet of new space. Now that when you add that together, you get 20. But then what we did was we backed out the window project, which we put into the fiscal 22 budget. And we also backed out about $1 million of electrical labor costs that the engineers are confident our own electrical students could do. So that's going to be a wonderful story to be able to tell in years to come, that
Mhm.
we've been able to maintain and maybe even expand our building. So this addition I'm talking about, where we would strategically renovate some shop space and maybe add some new space in a couple of locations. We know that other than the concrete and the steel and the roofing, our kids and our teachers from several programs could do the work on the inside. So that's great. It's not 18.9 million great, but it's certainly better than 20.
Right.
No, that's a great
Right.
point. But you make a very good point, and because I think that at the end of the day, from a practical point of view, if we borrowed more than our towns could afford, our towns would reject our budget, because our towns get one vote every year on our total assessment. So we've got to make absolutely sure, as you're asking, that we're providing a real scale of where this is going. And from your point of view, I would totally want to know, okay, the guy said 13.65%. He said 18.9 million. Let's do the math. Let's pretend it's 3% over 20 years and see what that impact. You have I would totally agree. I would absolutely do the same thing. And so if we can unpack that in more detail, where we might be saying in fiscal 23, it's the roof, and maybe we pour some foundation for an addition. And then in fiscal 24, it's ventilation, and in fiscal 25, it's fire suppression. If that's our plan, then you would also have the right to come back and say, well, then don't come to us with a big number all at once. Maybe you should break it up. And that would be a legitimate counter argument as to why we're doing it this way. And I have to tell you in all candor that part of the outreach is, what I'm hoping is, if we can explain the rationale and explain how we can't have debt overtake operating expenses, or else, we're not going to have a trade off a teacher for a roof, that kind of thing, because we have only one number. So I definitely think that that's something that we can do and make sure is presented to our communities, so that they understand exactly where we're coming from. And it is my hope, as I said, what I would like to have happen is that if MSBA invited us in this spring, we all can set our watches that it's like 4 years before something actually happens. But it would absolutely influence me to say, wait a minute, if we've got a 53% coupon coming in 4
Right.
years, we're calling a timeout on everything but the most essential improvements that we need to make. Because MSBA says, as they say to everybody, we expect you to keep maintaining your buildings. And we're looking at it saying, we know districts ask forever, certainly, to at least be invited for further study. Anyway, I won't belabor the point. I think you make a valid point, and it's something that, for us to say, we want you to give us the green light to do this, but we're not going to borrow all the money at once because we don't need to. We've got to be able to show people reasonably where we think we'd be. So in 5 years, what do you think you'd borrow in the next 5 years out of that amount? And that's a fair point, one that we can bring back to our respect.
Well, Tom, from working with you in the past, I will say the thing I like the most is, you don't come to the table with surprises. So I think, as you're saying, you're talking about things that are theoretically 3, 4, 5 years in the future, and if we're talking about them, planning for them, and trying to make that work today, it's not going to give us the headache tomorrow. So I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Other questions for the superintendent? All right. Hearing none and seeing none. Again, Tom, thank you for the great presentation. As always, it's very thorough, and it saves us a lot of time down the road when we need to answer. And it's always good having you on early, getting it done, and that way you can move on to the next town who you've got to answer the same questions to.
No, Kevin, every town in any given year has certain local needs and certain things that need to be addressed. So I'm more than happy to come back later in your budget cycle process if necessary. I know how busy you folks are, so I know you'll have me back if you absolutely need to, but I'm certainly able to extend and clarify any remarks. And I will get back to you regarding forecasting on how we might chunk this debt authorization in phases. So thanks very much for your time.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate that. Good
All right, good night. Off to shovel.
night.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Good night, Chris.
Night.
All right. Moving on in the agenda, here to discuss the CCA is Marianne Damasio, and she's going to go over. I sent you all a handout for review regarding some of the questions and frequently asked questions she has. And so I will turn the floor over to her where she can go and explain the program, explain the benefits to Hanson, and then we'll open it up to the floor for questions. So Marianne, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Chair Sullivan and members of the Finance Committee. Also with me tonight is Maureen Toomey. I don't know if she's turning her camera on, but she's also from Green Hanson and has been working on this with me. So thanks for having us here tonight to talk about community choice aggregation. Kevin, I didn't ask you before, and it's not essential, but I do have like 6 or 7 slides on a PowerPoint. Is that something I could share, or should I just talk through things?
Yeah, we might have to see if Ryan can give you the ability to share your screen. Ryan, are you there?
I am. Give me 1 second.
All right, look at that. I am now the presenter. All right, so it looks like, are you seeing yourself on the screen? Because I can move you off.
Yeah, I just see all of us in conference here.
How's that? Can you see the screen now?
I can't.
No.
Okay,
No.
then let's skip it. I'll just talk. Okay, let me move your pictures back over here. Community choice aggregation, 160 towns and cities in Massachusetts have already worked on community choice aggregation. And basically what it is like a buying club for electricity. So utilities like National Grid no longer makes their own energy, so they have to go out to bid to get energy. And what this would be is our town making some of those decisions about where we're getting our energy. So if we were to do community choice aggregation, we would be deciding where that energy came from, not as us as individuals, but there's statute in Massachusetts that explains how to do it, and you would get a broker who would do a negotiation and come up with some energy information and prices or electricity. So the source of energy would change, but everything else would remain the same. So if you're a National Grid customer, I think you could see it on the fact sheet. There's a picture on the top of the fact sheet that we sent where it has the source, delivery, and customer. So everything, if we were to go ahead with community choice aggregation, except the source of the energy would remain the same. So the delivery would be the same and your bill would look the same. It would just be where the electricity is coming from. So Hanson as a town has been doing this for about 20 years already, buying in bulk. And I talked to Jim Armstrong, he was saying that the town saves about 10 to 15% on electricity because it's like a, bulking up the program, bulk buying of electricity. And as I said before, more than about 160 communities do this already. And some of our neighboring communities like Rockland, Halifax, Abington, Marshfield, Kingston have already done it, and Situate and Marshfield, Situate and Marshfield actually are in Cohasset are working on finishing up. They've already voted yes, but they're working on the process. It takes about 18 months. So basically the way it happens, there are a bunch of steps. So if the town, at town meeting, if the residents were to vote for this, it's only a vote to go out and make the explorations and make some, decide whether or not, do the negotiations. So we'd get a broker at no cost to the town. We would then have that broker find out more about electricity prices are out there and what prices that we can get. And then it would come back, the Board of Selectmen would then get another vote to approve it. So This is not saying that we're going to do anything. It's saying that we're going to explore community choice aggregation. So the Board of Selectmen would approve it or vote on it, and then there are some approvals that are required on the state level from energy resources, public utilities, and then eventually, if it's all approved and okayed, there'd be outreach to the town and to the citizens, to the people who are the consumers, to say, here's what we've negotiated, and it would give the ratepayers in Hanson an opportunity to opt out. And that is part of statute, the way that it is, that everyone would get opted in the town, and then they would have the opportunity to opt out if they didn't want to do it, either through a phone call, an email, or a letter back to the to say that I'm not interested in doing this. So I don't have this available for you to see, but I looked up Rockland. Rockland has been doing this for a number of years, and they have the National Grid basic rate is 12.38 cents for electricity. They negotiated 10.74 cents for electricity, and that includes 5% more renewable. Part of the reason Green Hanson is very interested in this is we would like to get more renewable energy in the mix. Massachusetts requires 8%, and then towns can negotiate to get more. So Rockland, even with 5% more renewable energy, was able to get a rate that's 1.6 cents below the National Grid rate. And then if you wanted to, there's also an option in Rockland, you could opt up to 100%, and even that rate is just under the National Grid rate. So this doesn't guarantee that your rates will be lower, but some of the towns that I have looked at have lower rates. And Halifax also, they had, the basic services, as I said, is 12.38 cents, and Halifax negotiated 10.71 cents for their rate. And even for 100% renewable, they negotiated 10.8 cents. So the savings, what that comes out to, is about $3 to $6 a month for consumers. It's just off the supply on your electricity bill. It's not off your whole electricity bill. So it's about 40% of your electricity bill comes from supply. So it ends up being about $3 to $6 a month for these two towns that are our neighboring towns. So let me just look at my notes and see if there's anything I didn't catch. Yeah, why don't I stop there and just see if you had any questions or comments about what I've said.
Okay, thank you, Marianne. I'll open the floor to questions.
What's the downside? Can I just add, what's an obvious downside to doing this? I know my family did this years ago from a personal standpoint when we switched over, but.
Yeah, I don't see a lot of downside. The one downside I've seen, people have complained that they don't want to opt in.
Yeah.
They don't want to be opted in, and I understand that, and but it is part of the statute, so you need to be opted in, and then the choice is, I talked to the assistant town manager or administrator in Rockland, and she said at the beginning of their program, they did have a few people that called in to say, how do I do this? I want to opt out. I don't like to be opted in. But that was about it. She said after that, we didn't get any more calls. They were able to do it relatively easy. I do a green scene show, and I had a person on from Situate, and she was just saying, from what they've seen, that it's a win-win-win. She had a person who was her person who delivered oil, and he just said, this just seems like such a win-win-win. I can't see any downside. So 160 towns have done it, and from our point of view, it looks like a good thing. It's good for the environment. It in most cases is good for pocketbooks. I have to be very honest to say, during the pandemic, the rates change for National Grid every 6 months for residential, and the only time I've seen the rate lower was last March or April maybe, when the pandemic hit and there was a big dip in demand for electricity, and the Rockland rate went a little bit below. The National Grid rate went a little bit below the Rockland rate. But otherwise, that's a very unusual circumstance. I haven't seen that in any other towns. It's really been, for the most part, there are some savings, but it's not guaranteed. So, who knows if we'll have another pandemic, but that, I just want to be honest about that, but that's, it seems to be a win-win-win.
And Marianne, I guess I'll ask a question. You mentioned that we were already buying in bulk. That's certain?
That's Jim Armstrong. He's a former selectman, and he has said for the town, you're buying solar, and that this has been going on, I think he said, for about 20 years, and that it's been about an average of like 10 to 15% savings for the town. It's for municipal buildings, not for residents.
Okay.
I think that actually Jim had said that it was since 1999 that the town was actually involved with it. And he also had mentioned that the school as well, the Whitman Hanson Regional High School, was also tied in with a lot of the programs as well. So, but one of the other things that I think is a good thing is that when we actually sign up for this, if it goes through, is you sign up for a certain length of a contract, whereas with National Grid, it can change every 6 months. And, so basically, if you're trying to budget as a homeowner, you'll be able to know what your rate is going to be for that part of it, for the supply part of it. So that's the only other thing I would add in here.
And I'll just add on top of that, that the town can go for a 1, 2, or 3 year contract. In other towns, this is something that the town would have to decide, and the broker and the selectmen, is that some towns have gone for a lot more renewable, like 25 or 40%, and that would be a decision that would be made over the process. Is it a small amount or a bigger amount? But that's still, that would be up for discussion.
And I mean, does the percentage of renewable change the cost, I guess? Does one precipitate the other?
I think at the moment there's still a difference where renewables are a little more expensive, but with things shifting so quickly in the world of renewables and coal and gas, things change so quickly. I think that would be part of the process for people to see. So even with Halifax, they have 100% renewable option, and that price was still just, fractions of a cent lower than the National Grid rate.
Okay, thank you.
So, it depends on, supply and demand, what's coming online.
Sure. Any other questions for Marianne or Maureen regarding community choice aggregation?
No.
Yeah, I do. Just from an overall cost, we talked about the supply rates and things. Putting something like this together, engaging a broker, what are kind of upfront infrastructure costs are we looking at, if any?
It's zero.
To get a program like this off the ground?
Zero. It's just some, whatever committee, if it goes to Energy Committee or if a new committee is created, the way it was written last year, it was Energy Committee. So there'd be some, work of a committee, but there's no cost. The broker gets a very small percentage, but it doesn't come out of anything, there's no cost to the town.
Okay.
And are the energy contracts those would be negotiated by the Board of Selectmen like a normal contract for the town, or?
I believe that's a question I would have to get details about, but other towns have done it. There's a lot of, because this is a Massachusetts program, there's a lot that's in statute, so that it's not, as far as like how the broker does it, I think a lot of that is defined. And then when there's a negotiation, it's in terms of how much the electricity would cost and what kind of deal they could get, that would go back to the selectmen. If it comes back and it's 13.5 cents and it's 12.5 cents for National Grid, I'm sure the selectmen are going to say, we don't want this for our town. So, we're hoping that, like other towns, it will be lower. But I got off a little bit. But in terms of cost to the town for the broker, there's no cost. And it's no difference. Really, like, if this happened, it's just like, as Maureen said, National Grid, every 6 months, they decide how we're getting our electricity. And it might be more coal, more gas, less coal, more solar. You know, they're doing that already. So we're just being involved in that process and as a town. And the broker would do that and we would get to decide.
Okay. Any final questions for Marianne or Maureen from the committee?
I'm good.
No, I'm good.
Okay. Ladies, thank you very much for your time. We appreciate the information, and it will help us make an informed decision when we get to town meeting.
Okay, thanks so much for having us here tonight and happy to
Thank you very much. Have a good night.
provide anything else.
Have a good night.
You
Thank you.
too.
You too.
Thanks, Marianne.
Thank you.
All right, so that covers social voltaic, community choice, aggregation. I put one sort of final bullet in the agenda for tonight, and that was a general budget overview discussion of where we are. Again, I just got the budget books out to some of you today, so I'm not intending a deep dive, but I wanted to put that out there, an opportunity. I have not gotten any updated numbers from what our previous discussion was, still looking at roughly $2 million deficit. We haven't gotten any further with the schools. I haven't gotten a briefing as to what their number is or where we are. So not much beyond the data that you all already have in your hands. So are there any discussions about the sort of general budget, where we are right now, or anything along those lines?
I thought I saw the school presentation was at the end of the month.
I believe it is, but I haven't received any. They're keeping all their number in their pocket right now, so we'll wait and see. I know we have the number that the town administrator has used for now. We'll see what their actual presentation is, and I believe I'll probably be attending that virtually or whatever manner they have it, but I'll provide those numbers as soon as they become available. Anyone have any further discussion on any of the items we discussed tonight? Everyone's quiet tonight. Everyone's tired from shoveling.
Everybody's tired.
Dog keeps barking. Sorry. Just gonna be quiet.
I remember doing something similar years ago for like the different energy supply. Like for us, it worked out really good at the beginning and didn't work out at the end. I'm wondering if you subscribe to it, like how long are you in it for? How, like, when can you kind of get out of it if you want to? Because, you know, it was a friend of ours that we kind of did it through. And it was great at first, but then all of a sudden we're like, wait a minute, now we're like way overpaying. So it was interesting to hear like what that process is.
Those companies were typically different than the choice aggregation from the clean energy standpoint. There's a bunch of energy companies out there that will do that line basically and provide energy, but it wasn't necessarily based on clean energy or anything specific. It was just, hey, we're going to get you some savings. But even in this, there's still going to be community members that have some sort of contract like that through another third party.
Yeah.
They're going to have to honor those contracts until they are up for renewal before they can get in as a customer. So they'll be forced to opt out as community members if they're in one of those kind of individually run contracts. But I think people, from my understanding, and I guess maybe we need clarification from the group, is people can kind of opt out. There might be like a 30 or 90-day window or something, but you can almost opt out at any time if you want out. So
yeah, from the read ahead she gave us, it sounds like you can opt out at any moment.
Yeah.
And I'm sort of wondering how it plays in with National Grid. You know, if the whole town is, I'm still trying to figure out the dynamic and how it works out that they're underpaying the national grid standard rate, but I can't believe every town is the same. So I don't know if we're just seeing two of the highlights in Halifax and Rockland, or are there towns that have gone beyond their initial contract and they're now paying at or above the rate? That's why I was wondering, was it dependent on how much renewable we choose to go? And
Yeah.
so I just know there's going to be some issue with people.
1, 2, or 3 year contracts, I would think that when you renegotiate, you would still be getting decent terms, wouldn't you think? Because you said there were 1 contract.
I'm always leery of any sort of group contract. It brings me back to, I won't say they're the same, but the transfer station. We locked in a contract and then the contract went through the roof. And I'm not saying that's going to happen, but when you're all locked in at that one rate, how many of us, when the transfer station, went to our own private haulers? So I mean, is this something where you ping pong back and forth? And if enough people aren't happy with it, do they jump off the plan and then the rate goes up on the rest of the town? It seems like it's a lot of, I don't want to say moving parts, but we know how, there's not a fondness for group togetherness in this town. And I see a lot of people opposing this kind of measure, but maybe I'm wrong.
I think the big asterisk will be the opt out and how easy that is. Because if it's easy to opt out and just go back to the national grid rates, then so be it. But if there's going to be
even that, just getting people on board. I took away from this that it's an awful lot of change and heavy lifting to create this thing for possibly $3 to $5 a month. Are there going to be people that are just going to go, why do I need to go through the hassle, move information, do that for a $3 a month savings? Is it worth it to me? And there's got to be more to it than that, but I guess that's part of the education process.
Yeah, I mean, I think we won't, if it does pass at town meeting, it sounds like you won't even notice. Assuming they get a lower, if they get a lower price, you might notice your energy bill's lower. But if we voted at town meeting, we're all in, whether we like it or not. And then the onus is on the individual to get out of it. So there'll be people who stay on it because it's too much of a hassle to get off of it.
There's going to be 75% of people who don't even notice whether
right.
Not. I mean, I'm making that number up, but that's a reality.
Well, that's what I was trying to figure out. I was like, what's the downside to not doing it if there's anything obvious that would come up? But
yet another reason to go to town meeting, so you don't have 100 people making the choice for 10,000.
Yeah, if you want 200 people picking what your energy use is, you might want to show up to this one. So.
Yeah, but I mean, in the end too, there's the personal responsibility part of it, right? How many people don't show up? So
yeah.
It's,
yeah, no, you're absolutely right. So, any final thoughts on what we covered tonight? I wanted to keep this just kind of short, get two of the items off of our agenda and sort of move forward. We can't really get into the nitty gritty of the budget book until we've got some firm numbers. So I wanted to give you guys time to digest that, and hopefully, keep this meeting right around an hour. So what's that, Mike?
No, I was just going to say, I guess as we start to roll into the budget books and kind of looking department by department, I guess what I'm looking for is kind of a clear vision of what we want to accomplish out of this. Are we going to kind of, and I get the fact that it's based on, we're waiting on some additional information, but are we looking at this as to, we've got a $2 million shortfall we need to balance out? Are we looking at this as a percentage across the board? Are we going to kind of look at a consensus of how we plan on addressing that shortfall? And I think we need to look at it as addressing the shortfall because there's no guarantee any sort of override gets passed.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. I think that, with the school committee meeting at the, hopefully final, somewhat, maybe we'll have a final budget number from the school by the end of the month. Maybe.
That's
We haven't
interesting.
had it this early,
That ain't happening.
but if that's the case, I know that the town administrator and the town accountant have discussed paths forward as far as balancing the budget by, we're going to look at it through basically the three different methods. One with an override, a full override, one with a partial override, one with no override. So we're going to sort of have to ride out these three options into the end of the year as we get closer to May. Right now, the most drastic one is no override, full cuts across those departments, and we haven't even. I know Todd may have it, but he hasn't published it yet as to what those cuts would look like. But I think it's something we need to bring to the table when we start discussing it with the other departments. Can Chief Thompson and the fire department handle whatever percentage cuts they're going to have to take? Can Chief Mix and the police department handle theirs? What happens at town hall? We've always said that town hall is an interesting one because some of these departments are 1-2-person departments. So personnel cuts are tough in that respect. So I think it's, maybe it's we go forward with sort of a staggered approach, but it's tough to do all that work for all three and sort of keep juggling all the pieces. So
Should we not maybe take the books as Mike is saying and just do 10% across the board for the worst case scenario?
Yeah.
So we have those numbers, and then
Absolutely.
if partial override or full override comes up, we can adjust, but at least we got something. We're not waiting.
I think that's a worthwhile evolution, and why don't I reach out to the town accountant and the town administrator and see if they have them in a workable either Excel format or something that we can adjust. They can give us a copy and we can adjust it across the board without having to do sort of pen and ink on the books that we have now. So something that's sort of a living, breathing document that allows us to adjust and balance as we go on. I think that's a good point, Ken. All right, so next meeting, I'm looking at not next week because I know it's school vacation, but February 23rd. It is a Tuesday night.
Yeah, no, that should work.
It's not next Tuesday, but the Tuesday afterwards.
I'm good.
So we'll.
Yeah.
I'll say I'm
Okay.
fine for now.
Okay, so that looks good so far, and then maybe we can book that. And we'll get some solid numbers. So that is all I had. We are just prior to 8 o'clock, so I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second
So
that.
moved.
Moved by Mr. Dugan, seconded by Mrs. Werdeman. All those in favor, we'll do roll call. Mr. Dugan,
Aye.
Mr. McCormick,
All right.
Mr. Powers,
Hey,
Ms. Wright,
Aye.
Ms. Werdeman,
Aye.
Sullivan, aye. We are adjourned. Thank you all very much and have a good night.